Hi everybody, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Lottie and this is my May and June wrap up. I did it again. I did not intend to combine 2 months of wrap up, but I only read 3 books in May and I figured we'll just combine May and June because it's not that much to talk about for one video. And then I went ham in June and I read a shit ton of books. So we're here. I would say to you guys, get a drink, get a snack. We're probably going to be here for a while. But I hope you enjoy hearing my thoughts on the books that I read in May and June. The way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to do them as like 2 separate sections. So they will be chaptered if you just want to hear what I read in May, or if you want to skip straight to June, feel free, I don't care. But I'll talk you through a little bit of statistics as well, just because it's interesting. I don't know if you guys find it interesting, but I do. And yeah, we're going to talk about the books that I read in May and June, so buckle in and let's get started. So yes, as I said, I read 3 books in May, which is an equivalent to 1,901 pages, which is an average of 61 pages per day. In terms of star rating, one of the books I rated 5 stars and 2 of the books I rated 4 stars, which is an average of 4.3 stars per book. So the first book I read in May, I was actually just finishing in May. I think I read most of this in April, so that's how far back we're going for this book. And it goes to the Shadowmarket by Cassandra Clare, which is a short story collection in the world of the Shadowhunters. I can't talk about this book without spoiling many of the things in that series for you guys, but I really quite enjoyed this. I rated it 5 stars and yeah, it was just a lot of fun. It was very emotional. This spans quite a big period of time and the character we're following faces quite a lot of loss in their life, and some of it was very, very tragic and very, very sad. But I've really enjoyed this. I loved seeing different characters, especially meeting some more of the characters that I'll get to see in the Last Hour series, exploring all these different time periods. One of the short stories takes place during World War II, which I thought was very interesting because I've never really read a book set in World War II. So it was interesting. I enjoyed the setting a lot more than I thought I would. I found that like this series has kind of opened me up to historical fiction, and it's something I would like to explore a little bit more in the future. But yeah, you guys know by this point I really enjoy reading the Shadowhunters books. We're very, very nearly at the end of the read along, which is so sad, but at the same time I'm kind of glad that we're nearly at the end, because although I've been reading these books for so long, it'll be nice to kind of not have to think about them, like have one less compulsory read a month sort of thing, especially since it's such a long read along. But I have really enjoyed it and I'm very, very grateful to Becca for creating it, because I don't think I would ever have read these books if it weren't for her. But yeah, I really, really loved this book. It was great. The second book I read in May was left over from my March and April TBR, and it was Dolores Claiborne by Stephen King, and I rated this 4 stars and I actually really enjoyed it. So this is a standalone thriller kind of horror set, well, when is it set actually? I don't remember. I think it was the 90s. And it is this kind of monologue of this woman, Dolores Claiborne, as she talks to the police and confesses about her life. The police want to talk to her because the woman she worked for as a housemaid has just been found dead, and she is kind of a suspect in the death. And in fact, instead of talking about this woman, she kind of mainly confesses to the fact that she killed her husband. It was a very, very interesting story. There are no chapters in it, which I found very jarring at first, but once I got into the sort of style of the writing, I found it was great, and it was so fascinating and interesting to me. It's definitely not the kind of story at face value I would have been like, yeah, I will really enjoy that. When this was on my TBR, I think I pulled it out of the jar and I read the blurb. I was kind of like, I don't think I'm going to enjoy this story very much, but it very, very delightfully surprised me. It was just such an interesting story because there's not really that much that happens in it. Like for a thriller, it's part of the Thrilling Suspense collection, so for it to have that label, there isn't that much suspense, there isn't that much thrill, because we know from the very start that Dolores has killed her husband. But it's very interesting to kind of find out the circumstances that led to her killing him, how she pulled it off. And you've also got the story about this woman that she worked for as well, kind of tied in there. But it is literally a monologue of this woman. Like the only kind of speech we get is when she's telling the story. She does talk to the audience, I suppose. Like, she doesn't talk directly to the reader, but she's telling this story to the police, and she's also talking to them as well, so you kind of have that fourth wall breaking. But it was a very, very interesting story, and obviously, like, I will be reading more Stephen King in the future, but I found that this is the second book in this little collection that I've read now, and I'm finding that I'm enjoying them a lot. So I'm very much looking forward to reading the other 3 books in this collection. One of them is Misery, which I know that I really want to read that one anyway, but the other 2, like, I don't really know that much about. They are The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon and Rose Madder, and those are 2 books that I'd never really heard of before I started collecting Stephen King books, but I feel like I have very high expectations for them now in this little thrilling suspense collection. But yeah, I don't know if I could, like, actually say, like, it's got that title, because to me it wasn't a thrilling suspense book, but it was very unique in the story it was telling and the way it was told, and I just found it very, very intriguing. And the final book I read in May, and you will see now why I only read 3 books in May, is Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas, which is the 7th and final book in the Throne of Glass series, and the conclusion to A, my vlog series, and B, I'm so glad that I read this book. I'm so glad it's over. I rated it 4 stars in the end because I have enjoyed this series. It's just, like, very mid. Like, it's not mind-blowing to me compared to the other 2 Sarah J Maas series that I've read and I love and I rate, and I'm rereading ACOTAR again already. I can't believe how much I love the other series that she's written, and then this one was just so average for me. Like, I just can't believe it. But I do have a full spoilery reading vlog for this book if you are interested in checking that out and you've read this series. I have a vlog for all of the books in the series, but yeah, I just can't believe, like, I finally read this book. It feels like such a weight off my shoulders. It feels like such an achievement. It's the longest book I have ever read in my entire life, so I'm just so glad it's done. If you're not sure what the Throne of Glass series is about, the first book is following a character called Selena Sardothian, who is an assassin that has been imprisoned in the salt mines. And the Prince of the Kingdom comes to her and says, if you fight in this competition to be my father's champion, you can have freedom. So she agrees, because she wants to get out of prison, and she goes and fights in this competition. But while she is staying in the castle and training and competing in this competition, she uncovers a very big secret that ultimately sets off the chain of events for the rest of the series. This is high fantasy, it's Sarah J Maas, it's got fae, it's got shifters, it's very, very interesting in that sense. But I just found the whole sort of plot of the series to be a little bit underwhelming. It does start off as YA and make its way to new adult. I still cannot get over the rebranding of this series to make it adult, because if you had never heard of this series and you go into the bookshop, you head to the adult fantasy section and you see the first book, Throne of Glass, thinking it's going to be interesting, and you pick it up, I feel like so many people will not like this series because that book is very YA. That book is firmly in the YA category. But by the end of the series, this is very much new adult in the same way that ACOTAR is new adult, and it's not explicit in terms of sex scenes really, like compared to A Crescent City, but like this book, I would not give this book to a 13-14-year-old. I would give the first book to a 13-14-year-old, you know? And yes, because of the kind of series it is, when it was being published at the very least, the people who were growing up reading this series will then be at, you know, the kind of appropriate age. But at the same time, like, the characters in this series all start off a lot older than your typical YA characters, because they are like 18, 19, 20. I know that the first book is Sarah J Maas's first book she ever wrote, and that's why it's very YA, it reads very juvenile, and it's not very good, but I don't know, I'm not saying she should rewrite it just to make it kind of more in line with what you would expect for the rest of the series if it's now going to be shelved in the adult section, but maybe she should rewrite it just so it's a little bit more mature to read, because I feel like it's going to put so many people off the series, because at the heart of it there is a good story in there. I just feel like because it was teetering on the edge of YA and new adult for so long, that's where it fell flat. The main point is I'm so glad that this book is finished and I don't have to think about it ever again. Yes, Ashley and Tori are starting Mass Along. I'm going to join in the live shows. I'm not going to be rereading the books because I don't think I want to put myself through this again. So that is the modest stack for the books that I read in May. I had a really good reading month in May. I obviously just I'm glad that I thought I need to take my time with Kingdom of Ash and not rush myself through it or pressurize myself. Like, yes, it meant I only finished 3 books in the month, but it was still nearly 2,000 pages for these 3 books. So yeah, I'm just very pleased. So let's move on to the books that I read in June. First of all, let's talk about statistics. So in June, I finished 7 books, which was equivalent to 2,821 pages, or an average of 94 pages per day. For star ratings, I rated 1 book 3 stars, 3 books 4.5 stars, and 3 books 5 stars. June was a great reading month. That is an average of 4.5 stars per book. So the first book I finished in June was another carryover from May. This tends to be how it is with the Cassandra Clare books for me. It is The Red Scrolls of Magic, and this was the first book in the Eldest Curses series, which is not yet complete. This is obviously the May book for By the Angel Along. It follows Alec and Magnus and kind of the development of their relationship with each other. They're off on their very first couple's vacation when something happens and they have to go and sort it out. I enjoyed this for the first book in a series. It was obviously a lot shorter than most of the Shadowhunters books that I'm used to, and I feel like, yes, it was nice that it was a little bit shorter, but at the same time I feel like the plot went very, very quickly and we didn't get quite so many of those slower character moments that I really enjoy. But because we already at this point know Alec, we know Magnus, like we didn't necessarily need all of that character development, but it was kind of nice to see this story that focused solely on them, especially because they're 2 of my favourite characters in the whole series and I really love the relationship that they have. So it was very interesting to see them on their own without, like, you know, Jace and Clary and Julian and Emma and everybody else kind of in the way. It was very nice to just see them on their own doing their thing. I then picked up Solitaire by Alice Oseman. This is a young adult contemporary. It is the story of Tori Spring, Charlie's older sister. It is Alice Oseman's debut. It was what kicked off and inspired Heartstopper. So I was very intrigued to kind of see this different side of the Spring family, to see Tori's story, to see what she went through and to be in her head. I have read Alice Oseman novel before, Loveless, which was their newest one, so it was interesting to also go back and to see the debut of Alice Oseman and their writing at the time. It did fall flat in terms of the writing for me, but I will allow that. Alice wrote this, I think, while they were still in school. I think they were in 6th form, which I just find so inspiring. Like, there is just something about Alice Oseman's books, I feel, that encapsulate the British secondary school, high school experience, and I felt the same way when I read Loveless, because that is set at university, and despite the fact that I didn't go to a university like the one in that book, I think it's Durham, there were so many similarities to the university that I did go to. There were a lot of things I could relate to, and part of the reason I loved that book so much is because it captured an experience that I felt like, yes, I have lived this. And it was the same for Solitaire. It was the same for Solitaire. Although Tori goes to an all-girls school and the kind of setting is very different to the kind of school I went to, I just could relate to this so much, and I was like, I get it, I get this so much, I get exactly what Tori is talking about. And I don't know, Alice just really captures the experience. So if you want to know what it's like to be a teen in the UK, read their books. I think because Alice Oseman is only a few years older than me, they had a very similar experience to me at secondary school because we are so close in age, whereas I think maybe teenagers now might not be able to relate quite so much because some things might be a little bit different. And it's the same sort of thing as when I was reading young adult books as a teenager that were set in British secondary schools. I couldn't relate to them quite so much because I felt like that they weren't a realistic representation of what I was experiencing. One of the main series that I read as a teenager was the Georgia Nicholson series, and that I think is set kind of like the 90s, early 2000s. So although I enjoyed those books when I first read them, I couldn't relate in the same way I can relate to this one, simply because it was a different time. Teens are different with each generation. So yeah, it was just so wonderful to see kind of what I have lived through encapsulated so well. The main plot of this is about a group called Solitaire that keep pulling pranks at Tori's school, and they keep escalating and then getting a little bit more dangerous each time. While all this is happening, Tori develops a friendship with a guy called Michael. So it's kind of the story of Tori's friendship. It's about being a teenager, you know, there is friend drama, and yes, I did find some of it a little bit juvenile, but you've got to remember Tori is what, 16, 17, so it was realistic friends at that kind of age fight over the stupidest things, and they can make or break friendships forever, but they're literally like the stupidest things. It was just so fun. It was just a lot of fun. Like, it deals with a very, very heavy topic. Like, I think as well, because I see myself in Tori so much, I also see myself in her brother Charlie. There's just aspects of them that I really relate to, especially when I was their kind of age. So when I was reading this book, it was kind of like reading my actual experience at school, especially with Tori's mental health, which is such a huge talking point for this book as well. It was absolutely fantastic. I'm obviously going to be picking up more Alice Oseman in the future, but this was a very, very good one of their standalone books. Taking a completely different turn, I then read Into the Drowning Deep by Myra Grant, and this is a adult horror about mermaids in the bottom of the ocean. It is more of a sci-fi, I think, than a horror. Like, it is a horror plotline. People get killed, but it was very much more about this science, I thought, of these mermaids, of the voyage that the ship goes on. It's literally about scientists. It took me a little while to get into because it's very science heavy, and I felt like I just wasn't smart enough to understand the book. But once we kind of got going on the ship and got to know the characters a little bit more, I was really, really starting to get into it, and it was tense and it was terrifying, and I was really kind of like, are these people going to survive? It is very much about the people on the ship and the characters. We find out a lot kind of about the different fields that they work in. They're all some sort of marine scientist, and it was just very interesting to kind of have that explanation of what their job role was, why they were on the ship. It was just really interesting. The only thing I've read from Myra Grant before is the Wayward Children series under the Shauna Maguire pen name, so it was very, very different. I knew it was going to be different because there's probably a reason Shauna Maguire uses different pen names for the different kinds of books that they write, but I wasn't expecting it to be this different. But it was very kind of refreshing. I'm very much looking forward to reading more Myra Grant books in the future, and I've never really read anything that's set on the ocean. One of my favourite games of all time is Resident Evil 7, and there is a stage in that game where you are on this kind of sunken, abandoned ship, and it had those same kind of eerie, creepy vibes when you were like in the lower levels of the ship where, you know, the mermaids were closing in. I feel like it was over very, very quickly, and I feel like there wasn't that much resolution at the end of the book, and I would have liked to see it develop a little bit more because it was kind of like building up to something and then that was it, and I was like, oh, okay, I thought something was going to happen but it didn't. But it was still very, very interesting read. It was very, very creepy. I tried to remind myself while I was reading it was more about the journey than the destination, and it's the sort of book I would absolutely love to watch as a film. It was the kind of scary, thrillery horror that I just love watching films of, so it was really fun to read it as a book instead. I then read Dumplin by Julie Murphy, and this one was a little bit disappointing for me. I have seen the Netflix film of this, so I kind of knew what to expect going into it, but I feel like the film just was so much more entertaining than the book, sadly. This is a young adult contemporary about a young girl called Willardine Dixon, and she is the daughter of an ex-beauty queen, and the kind of premise of the plot makes you think that this is going to be the story of Willardine kind of taking back her self and taking part in this beauty competition to show, like, prove her mother wrong. And it kind of is about that. Willardine is fat, like, she knows that she's fat, she doesn't really care that she's fat, she's aware of it, she's proud of it, but obviously because she doesn't fit traditional beauty standards, she kind of faces a little bit of bullying, and also her mom kind of gives off the impression that she's ashamed of her almost. You've also got this plotline where her aunt has just recently passed away. Her aunt was also overweight and had a heart attack, and it's kind of alluded to that the reason this heart attack could have happened is because of her weight. I got that vibe of Willardine's mom. And then it's also the story about Willardine and these boys. So there's kind of all these different threads happening. It was very much a contemporary in the sense it was about everyday life, and there was this beauty pageant to kind of give it a little bit of a drive for the plot, but it was very much kind of just about Willardine living her life, going to work, going to school, making out with boys, and I just did not enjoy that aspect of it. I feel like the beauty pageant should have taken a much larger role in the story. It happens right at the very end, and it was the most interesting part of the whole book. A lot of the story is just about her on and off relationship with this guy she works with, and then also this very oatmeal man that she meets at school when she starts the new school year and has a bit of a relationship with as well. I just found that all of the characters in this were very two-dimensional, very boring. I did not really care about them at all. You do have drag queens thrown in there as well. Her aunt, before she passed away, she was a huge Dolly Parton fan. Willardini is a huge Dolly Parton fan as well, and her aunt used to go to this drag queen performance thing where everybody's like a Dolly Parton impersonator, and that kind of inspires Willardine to take part in this pageant. The blurb makes me think that like all of that interesting stuff was going to take a much larger role in the story, and it just didn't. So yeah, it was very, very disappointing. I do have the there's like a series of these standalones, and I do have the second one put in. I don't know if I want to read it now because I just was so underwhelmed by this, but because there is no film for that one, so I haven't seen kind of the plot or anything, maybe I'll pick it up and we'll see what it's all about. But yeah, it was just so underwhelming. It was so boring. I considered DNFing it many times, but I thought, you know what, I'll stick it out. I'll see what happens with this beauty pageant. And the beauty pageant was right at the end of the book, so yeah, it was just boring. I then needed to read something I knew I was going to enjoy to give me a bit of a pick-me-up. So I read Lore Olympus Volume 4 by Rachel Smythe. I love this book so much. I love this series so much. It is just fantastic. It keeps getting better with every release. I keep being so tempted to just read the webtoon version just so I can see what happens, because I just love this series so much. So Lore Olympus is a Hades and Persephone retelling with the Greek gods of Olympus all thrown in there as well. It is a fantasy romance graphic novel series, but it's a bit of a twist because Olympus is very modern, but we do kind of go to Earth a little bit in this one and see that it's still ancient Greek times, but Olympus itself is very modern. They've got cars, they've got phones, they've got computers, blah blah blah. And it's the story of Hades and Persephone, their relationship. It's a very, very slow burn romance, and there's a lot of other things thrown in there as well. A lot of interesting character developments. The art style in this is just absolutely stunning. I love the use of colour in this series so much, and I can't wait for volume 5. I literally, when this arrived, I was so tempted to just like sit and read it as soon as I opened the package, but I made myself wait so I could sit down an afternoon and with a cup of coffee and read it and really truly let myself get into it and enjoy it that way. It was just absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I've said that they just keep getting better and better, and I can't wait for the next one. I then read Gleam by Raven Kennedy, which is the third book in the Played Prisoner series, and it is my favourite in the Played Prisoner series so far. We knew this was going to happen, didn't we? So the Played Prisoner series is a fantasy romance series. It is a King Midas retelling with a twist, and in it we are following Oren, who is the king's gold-touched plated prisoner. She is not to be touched by anybody else. She's kept in a cage. One day Midas is looking to expand his territory, and so he takes all of his prized possessions with him. On that journey, something occurs that sets off a chain of events for Oren, and we find out more about all these different characters. There was major plot developments in this book. I was shook. I was just shook the whole way through. There was not a moment in this book where it was quiet and you had a chance to mull things over. It was just one thing after another, and I absolutely loved it. The second book I did really enjoy, but that was very much a character development story, and it's important in the series because it not only gets characters in the right place, but it also gives characters a journey to go on so that they can then do things in this book that they wouldn't have been able to do had they not had those character development moments. But this one was very plot heavy. There were many things that happened, many reveals. It was very exciting. If you are new to this series and you're just getting into it and you're not sure if you enjoy it, I would definitely say to stick it out at least until this book. Give this book a go and see if you love it then, because this one was just, I just still can't believe the things that happened in it. There is also some smut in this book. It is the best smut I have ever read in my entire life. It was fantastic. There is like 3 whole chapters, I think, one after the other, of stuff that happens between the characters. There's just the pining, the sexual tension is absolutely brilliant. It is one of the best fantasy romance series I've ever read. I don't even know how anything can ever compare to it. It was just brilliant. Absolutely loved it. Obviously 5 stars. I need the next book now. I need it now. If you want to see my full spoilery thoughts, there will be a vlog for Gleam. I don't know if it's going to be up before or after this video, but keep an eye out on my channel for when it's up. And to finish off the month, I read Saga Volume 4 by Brian K. Vaughn and Fiona Staples. I just really needed something as a bit of a palette cleanser for my current read, which I will go into in a moment. Yeah, I was just really wanting to pick up the comic series again because I read Volume 3 a few months ago and I've not continued it for a while, and I also don't want to leave it too long between volumes because I don't want to forget what happens. But this one takes place a few months after the end of the third one, so a little bit of time has passed. Our characters are in different places emotionally, physically, and it was very interesting to kind of see these character developments and where the plot's going next. It was very emotional, very dramatic, as is always the case with Saga. If you're not familiar with this series, it is a science fiction story, kind of like a Romeo and Juliet in space between these two warring planets. They have been at war for years, and members of each species end up meeting and falling in love and having a baby together, so that they are on the run because, you know, it's forbidden. Yeah, it's just kind of the story of them being on the run, about them trying to raise their daughter, and it's told from the perspective of the daughter, obviously a few years later, so it's very interesting to kind of see the story as it happens. We've also got a few subplots in there with side characters, and they're just as interesting, and now things are all kind of starting to tie together. It makes sense why we see those subplots with those side characters instead of them feeling very separate to our main characters. But yeah, I just really love this installment. I love the art style in this. It's very brutal, it's very dramatic. I think the first page in this volume is somebody giving birth. Once again, I think that's what we had in the first volume. Yeah, if you are sensitive to imagery, maybe check out trigger warnings and stuff for this series. Probably don't read it in a public place as well, because there are some very not safe for work panels in there, but it is just absolutely fantastic. I just really love it. Like, this is kind of spoken about as being like the best comic series that's out there right now, and I definitely think it lives up to that name. I'm really hoping to kind of catch up relatively soon. I don't know when volume 11 is coming, but I want to be ready for when volume 11 comes out because I have a lot of catching up to do. This is only volume 4, but yeah, I just really love this series. I can't wait to get to volume 5. I don't know why I keep leaving it so long between volumes, and I feel like this every time I pick it up, but I definitely need to be in the right mood to pick this up, and it was a nice break from what I'm currently reading to kind of just read this instead and just be like, okay, I don't have to think about my current read right now. And my current read I started in June, and I'm obviously going to finish it in July now, is The Last Argument of Kings by Jo Abercrombie, which is the third and final book in the First Law series, and it's the third book we're reading for Catch Up Book Club's First Law Along, which covers the overarching world of the First Law. So I am 450 pages into this so far, but I've decided to put it down for a little bit just because I'm not enjoying it as much as I want to, but I also found out that the live show is not going to be until later in July, which I didn't realise. So I know that I can sort of take my time with this now. I definitely am going to finish it. I'm very on the fence. I feel like I should DNF it because I'm not enjoying it as much as I want to, but because I'm reading it for Catch Up Book Club, I kind of want to try and stick it out so that I can kind of be involved with the live show and then see really what people talk about, whether or not they enjoyed it. But also I have bought the next book to read for Catch Up Book Club, so I feel like I need to finish this and then I can decide whether or not I want to DNF the next book when I get to it and then call it quits with the read along, because yeah, I'm financially invested in it. If I wasn't financially invested, it would be different, and I probably would just DNF, because I am at that point where I don't think I really care that much about the characters, unfortunately, and I feel like the plot is very confusing. I'm very nearly at the end of a trilogy and I still don't understand what the plot really is, and it sucks. It does suck. The series is kind of strange because although it's a high fantasy series with this like epic plot line, the plot isn't very clear, and the first book is actually very character driven, and we are following 3 main characters. One is a barbarian, one is a fencing protege, and the other one is an inquisitor for the king. And it's very interesting to see how these characters become interlinked with each other, but overall I just don't connect with any of them really. There's one character, Glockta, who's the inquisitor, that I do really like, and I like seeing the chapters that are from his perspective, but at this point they're so infrequent now that I just don't particularly care. I don't care about the overarching plot, and even the main characters that I started to really like in the second book, I just don't care anymore. So it does suck, but obviously I will give you guys my full kind of more in-depth thoughts when we come to my July wrap up, and you guys can kind of see like what I decided to rate it in the end, whether I decided to stick it out. So these are the books that I read in June. Obviously quite a few more than May, but it does balance out to still being like 5 books per month. But yeah, I had a pretty good reading month in June. A few disappointing with Dumplin, but the others were very, very enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to reading more from these different authors as well. It was just really good month. That is it from this video today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please remember to give it a big thumbs up, and let me know in the comments down below what you have read over the past 2 months. What was your favourite book that you read in May or June? I'd love to hear all your thoughts, especially if you have read any of the books that I've just talked about and what you thought of them. If you haven't already and you would like to be, please do consider subscribing. I post a new video every single week. And that is it from me today, guys. Bye!